Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 758B. And today's date is September 4th, 2015. And the title of this episode is Centcom Secret Docs Reveal Coalition's Carnage of Civilians in Iraq and Syria. Let's get right into the economic collapse geopolitical news. Now, a couple of reports ago, I talked about MH370, how they're finding the objects, the wingspan, and a French newspaper back then said, no, these are not part of MH370. Now we're getting word from Australia that they've confirmed that, yes, these are the plane parts that washed up on the remote island. And these are the parts from MH370. So right now we have two conflicting stories, but they're telling us that, yes, this is the plane parts. So we'll continually watch this, observe what's been going on, and maybe we can find out what really happened to this airliner. Now, we understand in South Sudan, Kerry, Obama, the UN was forcing and pushing the South Sudanese government to sign the peace agreement. And they finally did it. They've agreed to declare a permanent ceasefire, and of course this didn't hold. And in this ceasefire agreement, which I discussed before, now we have confirmation, they had to establish a transitional government. Now, every single time the U.S. government central bankers push a peace deal, it's never in favor of the other side. It's always with unrealistic terms. You will step down, we will take over. That's pretty much it. I mean, look in Ukraine. When Poroshenko was out there saying, okay, here's a ceasefire, all you need to do is lay down your weapons and we will take over that area. That was the peace deal. The same thing's happening in Yemen. Everyone give up, we're going to bring back the puppet government. And we see the fighting has continued. And what's very interesting about all of this is, why did the government and opposition sign this? I mean, they weren't really agreeing to it. They didn't really want to sign it. And then we find out that they were forced to do it, and it looked bad if they didn't sign a peace deal. But when this was being drawn up, Obama met, when he was in Africa, met with African leaders to discuss the South Sudanese conflict, but deliberately excluded the parties to the conflict. Well, didn't they do this in Ukraine with Poroshenko? He doesn't talk to the southeastern people. He leaves them out of everything. Obama's consultation with the key stakeholders was going on, except for the South Sudanese people. So they created this ceasefire peace deal without them. And they had to have a transitional government. They were going to lose their power, and we see this is not going to hold right now. We see out in Ukraine, Ukraine is trying to ramp up their gas deliveries. They're getting it from Slovakia. They cut off supplies from Russia. And now they made a deal with Lithuania / Poland. The only problem is they need an interconnector to get the gas into Ukraine. And they have to build this. This will take 2 to 3 years. So they really can't get the gas from them, but they're making a deal to receive gas from them. And Poroshenko right now, he has signed a directive authorizing a complex of measures aimed at creating a unified EU-Ukraine airspace. Now, this is something they need so they can join the European Union, to have common airspace. And he just signed that because we know this whole coup d'etat was to have Ukraine join the EU and NATO. Now, Putin decided to speak up about the Minsk II agreement, where we had President Hollande, Angela Merkel, Putin, Poroshenko. They all met. They talked about how they're going to implement this. And Putin said, if we speak about the Minsk agreements, I will recall amendments to the Constitution should be coordinated with Donbass. The law of elections to local self-government bodies should be coordinated with Donbass. The law of amnesty should be adopted. And he said, it is not. and the law on special status of these territories should be enacted. It has been adopted, but not enacted, because it was postponed once again. And he's saying that Ukraine right now is being controlled by external powers. And he's absolutely right. They are. And we know who it is. It's the United States. They're doing everything possible to derail the ceasefire agreement. And then, of course, then they turn it around and blame it on the southeastern people and, of course, Russia. NATO right now is bringing in their TAN tanks, which is usually used in desert areas. And these tanks are going to be deployed in Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Latvia, Estonia. And they're going to be repainting all of them to woodland green. This way they blend into the forests and things like that. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges specifically stressed the importance of the latest decision. So we see them bringing in the weapons, the tanks. They're camouflaging them. And they're going to be stationed in all of these countries. Because in June of 2015, U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter promised that the U.S. will deploy heavy weapons, including tanks, armored vehicles, artillery, to all of these European nations. And they are doing it right now. Now we know that China, they've had their World War II victory celebration parade. And I named a lot of countries that were there. And I said U.S. was not on the list. Well, we come to find out the reason they're not on the list is because the West boycotted the celebration of the Victory Day parade. The only Americans that attended are American veterans of the Flying Tigers. That's it. The government boycotted it. And then we hear all this talk, and we talked about this yesterday, about Chinese warships that came within 12 miles of the U.S. coast. And they're in international waters. They're in the Bering Strait. And if you look at a map, you'll see that Alaska and Russia are both there. So if you can make the case that the ships are off the coast of Russia, the ships are off the coast of Alaska. Which way do you want to play this? And it makes no sense because they're in international waters. Just like the U.S. brings their warships, 60% of the fleet in the Pacific, and they sail it right up to China in international waters. But no one makes a big deal of that. I mean, think about this. The U.S. brings the ships into the Black Sea. How many countries border the Black Sea? They're right there. They're in the Mediterranean, next to all of these countries. They're right there. But of course, what we have is the corporate media making a really big deal about this. The U.S. government making it a big deal to scare everyone. Remember, the enemies are China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Syria, and other nations. And they're getting everyone used to seeing this, and they're saying, they're the scary nation. These are the people we need to be afraid of. These are the people we're going to be going to war with. China right now, coming out of Taiwanese intelligence, they are saying that China is building 2 more aircraft carriers. China is building a lot of military equipment. So is the U.S., so is Russia. The U.S. is provoking war. The other countries are preparing for the provocation, for war. And right now they're making another big deal that Russia's spy ship was discovered off the coast of the United States. Of course, in international waters. But the USS Donald Cook is in the Black Sea, right off the coast of Russia. Same thing. And this ship is on its way to Cuba. But of course, the corporate media, once again, is making a huge deal out of this to scare everyone. The Chinese are coming. The Russians are coming. This is part of the propaganda to convince you of these two countries are the enemy. That's what they're doing because they know, and they know very well they're going to be starting a war to cover up this entire collapse. Now, at this point, we understand we're having this huge problem with all the war that is happening in the Middle East, in Africa, in Ukraine, and we're seeing a lot of refugees trying to move themselves out of this area. And the UN is stepping in right now, and they're saying to Europe that these 200,000 refugees, they need some place to go. So you need to share them among the EU states and let them in. A lot of the countries are screaming and yelling, absolutely not. They're not allowed into our country. Even the US is saying, yeah, we're not making any plans to take any of these refugees whatsoever. Now, Putin decided to come out, and he's saying that these refugees that we see are not because of Assad, because a lot of them are coming from Syria. They're not running away from Assad, but what they're running away from is the Islamic State. He said, which seized large areas in Syria and Iraq, and they're committing atrocities. Now remember, this is the proxy army for the United States government central bankers. They're pushing war in Syria, and in Iraq, it's the people that are rising up who want their country back. So we have two things happening here. In Libya, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, the people are rising up. They want their country back. Now, of course, they intermixed the Islamic State in there to make it look like the Islamic State is in the country waging war. But it really isn't. It is the people in these countries. The Islamic State, the real force, is in Syria. The proxy army is in Syria. The other countries, they take a camera crew around, they take a couple of them, they take a couple snapshots, video some things, and they say, yes, they're in this country. It's almost what they did with Al-Qaeda. I mean, back when they had the drone operations, they said, all these people are Al-Qaeda. No, they were the people who didn't want the puppet government up from the U.S. in their countries, and they wanted them out. So they had to use Al-Qaeda as the name because we know there was legislation that said the U.S. can use drone attacks against Al-Qaeda. That's why they called everyone Al-Qaeda. So right now we have the proxy army in Syria, and Putin is saying that these hundreds of thousands of people that are leaving Syria, it's because of the proxy army that the United States is controlling. Because they're getting into their towns, they're burning people, killing people, and people are afraid of this. They don't want to stay. Would you want to stay? I wouldn't. So they're leaving. And this is why he's saying we need to get together and have some type of international coalition to fight this terrorism. Now, he knows what's going on here. And he's putting the U.S. in a corner, trying to make them do something. Or to fold and say, okay, we're not going to go forward with this. But, you know, the United States is not going to do that. They never back down. They never admit when they're wrong. We know the Pentagon right now is shipping $1 billion worth of arms to the Middle East because of this Iran deal, and we know this is not why. All of this weaponry is going towards what is going to happen in Syria. Because we have to remember what John Kerry said. There will be ground forces when the time is right. In Yemen, there is now talks about splitting Yemen in two. Almost like Sudan. Almost like they wanted to do with Iraq, because we know that Biden approached the prime minister in Iraq and said, listen, maybe we should split the country in two, because this is their ultimate goal, is to take all these countries and create a Sunni area, a Shia area, and a Kurdish area. And we can see this has been their plan all along. This way they can rule out the fighting that's been going on. Now, Turkey, their mandate was going to expire, but they extended their mandate to fight in Syria and Iraq, which is really not surprising. We knew they were going to do this. Now, the U.S. and the coalition forces are continually pushing the propaganda that they kill no civilians in Iraq and Syria. Our weaponry is so exact that no civilians have died. Well, there's been a newly declassified Centcom document published by Air Wars and an international media partner for the first time on Thursday, which reveals by early May of this year that the coalition had already internally investigated dozens of events involving at least 325 possible civilian deaths from airstrikes. And guess what? Yeah, they're killing civilians. I mean, the previous secret 14-page file obtained under the Freedom of Information Act by journalist Joseph Trevithick looked into this, and yeah, out of all these strikes, think about it, 6,500 airstrikes, they're reporting 2 deaths of civilians. No, there's hundreds and hundreds of people who died in these air raids, but they're trying to convince everyone that no, we're hitting the Islamic State, we're hitting the proper targets. Come on. It's completely impossible. Look what's happening in Yemen with Saudi Arabia bombing. They're hitting civilians, hitting their infrastructure. The same thing is happening in Syria. They're bombing and hitting infrastructure, and there are people that are dying. So all this talk about no civilians dying is absolutely fake. It's false. It's phony. It's distorted. And they do this on purpose. Just like the Pentagon realized that their information that was coming out from Syria, that the bombings weren't really hitting the Islamic State. They weren't winning. They were actually losing. The Islamic State has been expanding in Syria, not contracting. All of this is to deceive everyone, to make everyone believe, yes, we're definitely going after the Islamic State, but they're not. I mean, they do this on purpose to make everyone believe that they're going after terrorism. Now, if this is true, then they should allow China, they should allow Russia in on the fight against the terrorists. But they don't want this to happen. Now, Putin is trying to broker a peace deal. And he has Assad willing to basically allow the opposition to share government power in Syria, where he would have elections and they would vote someone in and they would share power. This is going to be very tricky here because we know the U.S. government central bankers, this is not what they really want. They want Assad out. They don't want a sharing of power, just like in Sudan. Here's the ceasefire deal, here's the peace deal. One of the points of it is to remove yourself in the government and will place a puppet government in there. This is what they really want. So are they going to go along with this? Well, Putin kind of has them in a corner right now because he's brokering a peace deal. The opposition is going to have a seat. And it looks bad to the world if they don't agree. So we're going to have to watch this very, very carefully. Now, we've had reports that Russia has been flying military jets in Syria. And it turns out there was an Israeli news story, which was falsified, that there are no military operations going on in Syria by Russia. They're bringing in military assets. They're setting up a base, but they're not actually doing anything. But the White House is going along with this, saying, yes, we have proof. They are, going to bomb. We don't know exactly what they're bombing, and this could destabilize Syria. Well, let's think about this for a second. The United States went into a sovereign nation without the permission of the government, and with other countries started to bomb inside Syria. Assad is inviting Putin into the country to help. So who's destabilizing the country? Who has the right to be there? Not the United States, not the coalition forces. Putin has the right to be there because he was asked to come in and help. So right now, the U.S. is backed into a corner. Putin is setting up a base with military assets. He's trying to broker a peace deal. And this is a huge, huge problem for the United States. Because how can they say no? No, you can't go after these terrorists. Well, they don't want him to because it's the proxy army. So they're kind of stuck at this point. So they're going to do something huge. And we're already getting some information that there might be some type of major chemical attack by the Islamic State. Now, whenever the United States government central bankers are losing a battle or they can't make gains, they always resort to white phosphorus, chemical weapons, cluster bombs, other type of weapons that are kind of banned. And we can see already they're telling the troops that are already in Iraq to dust off their chemical suits because there could be some type of chemical attack coming very, very soon from the Islamic State, the proxy army for the United States. And this is going to be a huge false flag. Now, most likely they'll try to push the authorization for war. Who knows if it'll gain traction? And we'll have to see how this plays out. And we're going to have to watch this situation very closely because this could just blow up and this could be an all-out war. Now, the central bankers don't mind this because they know the system's collapsing and they can blame the collapse on the event that is coming, the war that we're going to be getting into, and they can use it as an excuse to create more money and say the economy is not going to recover. It's going to get worse because of the war. So we can see where we're headed at this point. As they're backed into a corner, and I know they have tricky ways of manipulating because they really don't play by the rules. If they don't like something, they rewrite the laws. They do something that a normal person wouldn't do. But eventually, they're going to run out of these things, and eventually the system will come down without them, and they rather control it because they don't want to be blamed for it. And we can see their days are numbered. It's getting harder and harder. And this is why when they're pushed into a corner, like a wild animal, they will come out clawing and biting. And they will do something that is horrific. And we know it is coming very soon. Because they need to start the war to cover up this entire disastrous collapse. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.